What if I told you that Donald Trump, the man who built his entire political career on border security and mass deportations, is about to make the most controversial immigration deal in American history? A deal so unexpected that it could either cement his legacy as a transformative leader or tear apart the very coalition that put him back in the White House. Right now, behind closed doors on Capitol Hill, a seismic shift is happening. 3 million people who've lived in America their entire lives, people who know no other home, are about to find out if they'll finally become legal residents. But there's a catch. A massive, game-changing catch that involves billions of dollars and the complete destruction of sanctuary cities as we know them. This isn't speculation. This is happening right now. And what you're about to learn will change everything you thought you knew about Trump's immigration agenda. Let me paint you a picture of what's really going on behind the scenes. On February 5th, 2026, Hugh Hewitt, one of the most influential conservative voices in America and a close Trump ally, dropped a bombshell on Fox News. He didn't just hint at a deal. He laid out the entire framework for what could be the most significant immigration reform in decades. But here's where it gets absolutely wild. This deal would grant legal status to over 3 million dreamers, people brought to America illegally as children. These are people who've grown up American in every way except on paper. They speak English, they work American jobs, they pay American taxes. Many don't even speak the language of their birth countries. And Trump, the deportation president, is reportedly open to letting them stay permanently. Now, if you're a Trump supporter, you might be thinking, wait, what? This sounds like amnesty. And if you're on the left, you're probably thinking, there's no way Trump would actually do this. But both of you would be missing the most crucial part of this deal, because Trump isn't just handing out legal status for free. No. What he's demanding in return would fundamentally reshape American immigration enforcement forever, and potentially bankrupt dozens of major American cities in the process. We're talking about the complete and total defunding of every sanctuary city and sanctuary state in America. To understand why this deal is so explosive, you need to understand the political minefield Trump is walking into. For 2 decades, immigration reform has been the third rail of American politics. Every single attempt at comprehensive immigration reform has failed spectacularly. George W. Bush tried it, Barack Obama tried it, the Gang of Eight tried it. Every single time, the bill either gets killed in Congress or ripped apart by activists on both the extreme right and the extreme left. Why? Because immigration isn't just a policy issue in America. It's become a tribal identity marker. If you're on the right, you're supposed to oppose anything that looks like amnesty. If you're on the left, you're supposed to oppose anything that increases enforcement. Any politician who tries to find middle ground gets absolutely destroyed by their own base. But Trump has always operated differently. Remember his First Step Act? Criminal justice reform was supposed to be politically impossible for Republicans. Conservatives were supposed to be the law and order party, tough on crime, tough on criminals. But Trump worked with Kim Kardashian, of all people, passed bipartisan criminal justice reform, and nobody on the right could touch him for it. Why? Because Trump had built up so much credibility on law and order that he had the political capital to make a deal nobody else could make. Hugh Hewitt calls this Trump's Nixon to China moment on immigration. And if you know your history, you know exactly what that means. In 1972, Richard Nixon became the first U.S. president to visit communist China. This was shocking because Nixon had built his entire career as a hardcore anti-communist warrior. He was the guy who went after communists in Hollywood. He was paranoid about communist infiltration. He was Mr. Anti-Communist America. But precisely because he was so credibly anti-communist, he was the only president who could open relations with China without being accused of being soft on communism. A Democrat couldn't have done it. They would have been destroyed as communist sympathizers. Trump is in the exact same position on immigration. He's the guy who said Mexico was sending rapists and criminals. He's the guy who built the wall. He's the guy who implemented the travel ban. He's the guy currently conducting the largest deportation operation in American history, targeting criminal illegal immigrants across the country. So if Trump makes a deal to regularize dreamers, who's going to call him soft on immigration? Nobody with any credibility. So let's break down exactly what this deal would look like, because the details matter enormously. On one side, you have the dreamers. These are people brought to America illegally as minors. We're talking about over 3 million people. Some came as infants, some came as toddlers, some came as teenagers. But all of them have now lived in America for years, often decades. Many of these people are now in their 20s and 30s. They went to American schools. They graduated from American universities. They work American jobs, pay American taxes, and know no other home. Try to imagine being told at 25 years old that you're being deported to a country you left when you were 3 years old, where you don't speak the language, where you don't know anyone, where you have no connections whatsoever. The American public overwhelmingly supports giving these people legal status. Poll after poll shows that the vast majority of Americans, including most Republicans, think dreamers shouldn't be deported. It's one of the few immigration issues where there's actually broad consensus. But here's the critical part. Trump would give them blue cards, not citizenship. This is huge. Previous immigration reform proposals promised a pathway to citizenship. That's where conservatives always drew the line, because citizenship means voting rights. It means access to entitlements like Medicare and Social Security. It means people who broke the law to get here get the same rights as people who waited in line legally for years, sometimes decades. Blue cards would give dreamers legal status. They could work legally. They wouldn't face deportation, but they wouldn't become citizens. They wouldn't vote. They wouldn't access entitlements reserved for American citizens. Now here's what Trump would demand in return, and this is where things get absolutely nuclear. Complete defunding of every sanctuary city and sanctuary state in America. Let me explain what that actually means, because this isn't just symbolic. This would be financially catastrophic for some of America's largest cities. Sanctuary cities are jurisdictions that refuse to cooperate with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, known as ICE. When ICE detains someone for immigration violations and asks local police to hold them for pickup, sanctuary cities refuse. They release criminal, illegal immigrants back onto the streets rather than turn them over to federal immigration authorities. Cities like New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, San Francisco, Seattle, and dozens of others have declared themselves sanctuary cities. They receive billions upon billions of dollars in federal funding every year. We're talking about Department of Justice grants, Department of Homeland Security funding, transportation funding, housing funding, you name it. Trump's deal would cut all of that off, every single dollar. Imagine you're the mayor of Los Angeles. Your city is already facing a massive budget crisis. Homelessness is out of control. Crime is rising. Infrastructure is crumbling. And now you're told that unless you start cooperating with ICE and turning over criminal illegal immigrants, you're losing billions in federal funding. What do? Some mayors would probably stand their ground, at least initially. But how long can they hold out when their cities are going bankrupt? When they have to cut police, firefighters, teachers, sanitation workers? When they have to explain to their constituents that their taxes are going up or their services are being cut because the mayor refuses to hand over convicted criminals to federal immigration authorities? This is where Trump's political instincts become crystal clear. He's not just making a deal. He's forcing Democrats to make an impossible choice. Do Democrats accept the deal? If they do, they get legal status for 3 million dreamers, something they've been fighting for since the early 2000s. This would be a massive policy victory. These are real people whose lives would be transformed overnight. But accepting the deal means throwing sanctuary cities under the bus. It means progressive mayors in blue cities lose billions in funding. It means Democratic governors have to choose between protecting dreamers and protecting their sanctuary policies. Or do Democrats reject the deal? If they do, they can protect sanctuary cities and maintain their stance against cooperation with ICE. But then they have to explain to 3 million dreamers and their families why they killed the best chance they've ever had at legal status. They have to explain why they chose bureaucratic resistance over actually helping the people they claim to care about. Either way, Trump wins politically. If Democrats accept, Trump gets to claim credit for solving a problem that's plagued America for decades, while also dismantling the sanctuary city infrastructure that's been frustrating immigration enforcement for years. If Democrats reject, Trump gets to say, "I offered to help the dreamers. I put a real deal on the table." But Democrats would rather play politics than actually solve problems. Now, you might be wondering, is this actually going to happen, or is this just Washington talk? The truth is, it's complicated. Hugh Hewitt interviewed Senate Majority Leader John Thune on February 5th and directly asked him about including Dreamers' regularization in the final fiscal year 2026 appropriations bill for the Department of Homeland Security. Thune didn't sound overly optimistic, but critically, he didn't rule it out either. Here's what that tells us. Republican leadership is at least open to the conversation. They're not slamming the door shut. They're not saying it's dead on arrival. But Thune also acknowledged the political scars. Nearly every Republican legislator carries battle wounds from the last 2 decades of immigration fights. They remember watching John McCain get destroyed by conservatives for supporting comprehensive immigration reform. They remember the Gang of 8 debacle. They remember how these issues tear apart the Republican coalition. There's a small but extremely loud group of deportation absolutists who oppose any form of legal status for anyone who entered the country illegally, period. These people don't care if you were 6 months old when you crossed the border. They don't care if you've lived here for 30 years. They want everyone deported, no exceptions. Hewitt calls these people out directly, saying their strident rejection of common-sense solutions must be rejected by the president and congressional Republicans. That's significant language from a major conservative voice. But here's the trillion-dollar question. Would Trump's base actually accept this deal? Trump's entire 2024 campaign was built on 3 immigration promises. Number 1, close the border. Check, he's done it. Number 2, finish the wall, in progress, funding secured. Number 3, deport dangerous criminal illegal immigrants, happening right now. ICE is conducting massive operations across the country targeting gang members, violent criminals, and other priority deportations. Trump has delivered on the core promises that brought him back to the White House. He's secured the border. He's enforcing immigration law more aggressively than any president in modern history. He's showing strength, not weakness. So the question is, if Trump has proven himself on immigration enforcement, does he have the political capital to make this deal? Hewitt thinks yes. He argues that the coalition that elected Trump was built on common sense about the border, not extremism. Most Americans want the border secured. Most Americans want dangerous criminals deported. But most Americans also don't want to deport people who were brought here as toddlers and have lived American lives ever since. The absolutists will scream. They always do. But are there enough of them to actually threaten Trump? Or are they just a loud minority that makes a lot of noise on Twitter but doesn't represent the actual Republican coalition? Meanwhile, Democrats are facing their own impossible calculation. For years, Democrats have protected sanctuary cities as a matter of principle. They've argued that local police shouldn't be turned into immigration enforcement agents. They've argued that immigrant communities won't report crimes or cooperate with police if they fear deportation. They've argued that sanctuary policies make communities safer, not more dangerous. But now they're being offered something they've wanted for decades: permanent legal status for dreamers. How do they say no to that? Imagine you're a Democratic senator from a state with a large immigrant population. Imagine you've spent years telling dreamers and their families that you're fighting for them, that you'll protect them, that you'll get them legal status. And now there's an actual deal on the table. Not a symbolic vote that you know will fail, not a messaging bill, an actual real deal that could pass Congress and be signed into law. Do you really look 3 million dreamers in the eye and tell them, sorry, we had a chance to give you legal status, but we chose to protect sanctuary city funding instead? Some progressives would absolutely make that choice. They'd argue that accepting Trump's deal legitimizes his immigration enforcement apparatus. They'd argue that funding cuts to sanctuary cities would hurt vulnerable communities. They'd argue that this is a trap designed to force Democrats into supporting policies they've opposed for years. But moderate Democrats, especially those in swing states or districts, would face enormous pressure to take the deal. Let's talk about what sanctuary cities actually do in practice, because this gets lost in the political rhetoric. When ICE arrests someone for immigration violations and asks a local jail to hold them for 48 hours so ICE can pick them up, sanctuary cities refuse. They release the person instead. Now, defenders of sanctuary policies argue that most of these people aren't dangerous criminals. They argue that many are just people who overstayed visas or committed minor infractions. But critics point to specific cases where sanctuary cities released convicted criminals who then went on to commit heinous crimes, including murder and rape. One of the most infamous cases was Kate Steinle, killed in San Francisco in 2015 by an illegal immigrant who had been deported 5 times and had 7 felony convictions. San Francisco had released him despite an ICE detainer request. Her death became a rallying cry for opponents of sanctuary policies. Sanctuary city defenders would argue that these cases are statistical outliers, that you can't base policy on isolated incidents, that sanctuary policies on the whole make communities safer by encouraging immigrant cooperation with police. But Trump doesn't need to win the policy debate. He just needs to win the political debate. And politically, it's much easier to point to a grieving family and ask, why did your city release this criminal instead of turning him over to ICE? Trump's leverage here is the federal budget, and it's enormous. The federal government sends hundreds of billions of dollars to state and local governments every year. Some of this is formula-based funding that's hard to cut, but much of it is discretionary grant funding controlled by federal agencies. The Department of Justice alone sends billions in grants to local police departments. Department of Homeland Security funding supports local emergency management and disaster preparedness. Transportation funding builds roads and transit systems. Housing funding supports affordable housing programs. All of this could theoretically be on the chopping block for sanctuary jurisdictions. Now, there are legal questions about how far Trump can go. Courts have previously ruled that the federal government can't impose conditions on federal funding that are unrelated to the purpose of the funding. You can't withhold highway funding because a state won't cooperate on immigration. But Trump's lawyers would argue that withholding Department of Justice and Department of Homeland Security funding is directly related to immigration enforcement. If a city won't cooperate with federal immigration law, why should it receive federal funding for law enforcement and homeland security? This would absolutely end up in court. Sanctuary cities would sue. The cases would likely reach the Supreme Court. But Trump has a 6-3 conservative majority on the court, and this court has been generally sympathetic to executive power on immigration issues. So when could this actually happen? Thune mentioned the final fiscal year 2026 appropriations bill for the Department of Homeland Security. That bill needs to pass soon. The federal government has been operating on continuing resolutions, which are basically temporary spending patches that keep the government running at current funding levels. But eventually, Congress needs to pass actual appropriations bills. The DHS appropriations bill is one of the most contentious because it directly deals with border security and immigration enforcement funding. This creates a natural legislative vehicle for Trump's deal. Republicans could insert language in the DHS appropriations bill that grants blue card status to dreamers meeting specific criteria and cuts off federal funding to sanctuary jurisdictions. Democrats would have to decide, do we shut down DHS over this? Do we block funding for immigration enforcement to protect sanctuary cities, or do we accept the deal? The clock is ticking. And unlike most legislative negotiations where both sides can just kick the can down the road indefinitely, appropriations bills have real deadlines. Let's game out what happens if this deal actually passes. On the Republican side, you'd see an immediate split. Hardline immigration restrictionists like Stephen Miller and some House Freedom Caucus members would be furious. They'd call it amnesty. They'd say Trump betrayed his base. You'd see angry op-eds in conservative media outlets. But most Republicans would likely fall in line, especially if Trump sells it effectively. He'd emphasize the enforcement side. We destroyed sanctuary cities. We forced Democrat mayors to cooperate with ICE. We made America safer. The blue card provision would be framed as a reasonable compromise for people who truly grew up American. On the Democratic side, the split would be even more dramatic. Progressive activists would be apoplectic. They'd organize protests. They'd call Democrats who voted for it sellouts and traitors. Squad members like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez would probably vote against it. But moderate Democrats and Democrats representing swing districts would likely support it. They'd face enormous pressure from immigrant advocacy groups who would be begging them to take the deal and finally give Dreamers legal status. In sanctuary cities, mayors would be caught in an impossible position. Do they maintain sanctuary policies and watch their budgets implode? Or do they capitulate and start cooperating with ICE? Zoom out for a second and think about what this deal would actually accomplish beyond the immediate policy changes. First, it would fundamentally reshape the immigration debate in America. For decades, the debate has been stuck in the same tired binary: amnesty versus deportation, enforcement versus compassion. This deal would show that compromise is actually possible, that you can have both enforcement and compassion, that these aren't mutually exclusive. Second, it would destroy the political infrastructure that's enabled illegal immigration for decades. Sanctuary cities aren't just symbolic, they're a practical barrier to immigration enforcement. When local jails release people instead of turning them over to ICE, it makes enforcement exponentially harder. ICE has to conduct street arrests instead of jail transfers, which is more dangerous, more expensive, and less effective. If sanctuary cities disappear, immigration enforcement becomes dramatically more effective. ICE can focus resources on finding people instead of fighting with local governments. This would represent the single biggest shift in immigration enforcement capacity in modern history. Third, it would cement Trump's legacy as someone who actually solves problems instead of just talking about them. Every president since Reagan has promised to fix immigration. None have delivered. If Trump pulls this off, he'd be the first president in 40 years to pass significant immigration reform. But beyond all the politics and policy, there are real human lives at stake here. Imagine you're a dreamer. You came to America when you were 4 years old. You don't remember your birth country. You went to American schools, made American friends, got an American education. You work an American job, pay American taxes. You've lived in fear of deportation your entire adult life. Every time there's a traffic stop, you worry. Every time there's immigration news, you worry. You can't plan your future, because you don't know if you'll even be in this country next year. And now there's a chance, a real chance, that you could get legal status. You could work without fear. You could travel without worrying about re-entry. You could build a life without looking over your shoulder constantly. Would you take that deal even if it meant stricter enforcement against criminal illegal immigrants? Even if it meant sanctuary cities lose funding? Most dreamers would probably say yes in a heartbeat, because at the end of the day, they're not making political calculations. They're just trying to live their lives. On the flip side, there are American communities that have been devastated by illegal immigration. Small towns that have seen huge influxes of illegal immigrants straining local services. Crime victims who've been hurt by people who shouldn't have been in the country. Workers who've seen wages depressed by illegal labor competition. For them, the destruction of sanctuary cities would be a massive victory, evidence that the government is finally taking enforcement seriously. So here's where we are. Donald Trump, the deportation president, is potentially on the verge of the most consequential immigration deal in decades. He'd give legal status to 3 million dreamers in exchange for completely defunding sanctuary cities. It's a deal only Trump could make, because only Trump has the credibility on immigration enforcement to pull it off without being accused of weakness. Democrats face an impossible choice: help dreamers or protect sanctuary cities. They can't do both. Republicans face their own calculation: trust Trump to make a deal that strengthens enforcement overall, or reject any hint of legal status for illegal immigrants on principle. Senate leadership is cautiously open to the idea, but scarred from past immigration battles. The appropriations deadline is approaching fast, and 3 million dreamers are waiting to find out if they'll finally get to stop living in fear. Hugh Hewitt calls this Trump's Nixon to China moment. He might be right. This could be the kind of transformative deal that reshapes American politics for a generation. Or it could blow up spectacularly and remind us why immigration reform is called the third rail of American politics. Either way, we're about to find out. Because unlike most Washington negotiations that drag on forever with no real stakes, this one has a deadline, real money on the line, and millions of lives hanging in the balance. The next few weeks will determine whether Trump cements his legacy as a president who actually solved America's immigration crisis, or whether this was just another failed attempt at comprehensive reform that joins the graveyard of broken promises on this issue. Keep your eyes on the DHS appropriations bill. That's where this all gets decided, and whatever happens, the immigration debate in America will never be the same.